The virtual work session of the Annapolis City Council on Thursday, March 11th, 2021 will be called to order at 3:03. At this time, would everyone join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Play ball.
Just me and you, El.
Yeah.
All right.
Best one ever.
Mr. City Attorney, please present the first item on the agenda.
The first item on the agenda is ID 4421, update on the 2021 City of Annapolis municipal elections. The presenter will be the chair of the Board of Supervisors of Elections, Ms. Leahy.
Welcome, Ms. Leahy.
Hey. All right. Good afternoon.
Hey. Thanks for your hard work.
Okay? All right. Well, first, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to update you on the plans that the Board of Supervisors of Elections have been considering moving forward with the 2021 elections. I'm specifically going to talk about mail-in voting, ballot drop boxes, and polling places. Primarily, this goes without saying that the board's charge is to conduct safe, secure, accessible elections for Annapolis voters and to ensure their rights and to prepare the city for the two elections. The board's members are Brianna Cuffey, Cliff Myers, and myself, and we are ably supported and assisted by Ashley Leonard, Regina Watkins-Eldridge, and Susan Eckert, who has been brought on as the election administration assistant. In addition, Joe Torrey and David Garris with the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections have been given us invaluable time and guidance and information. If you recall, I guess back in June of last year, there was a resolution that was passed about the election, setting the dates, but it also gave the option for having what at that time was called vote by mail voting. Since then, Maryland has actually adopted the terminology of mail-in voting, which previously was known as absentee voting. The board began looking at mail-in voting even before COVID. We had been working with or talking with Rockville as far as looking at it and had been considering it, primarily because it has been shown in other areas to increase turnout, increase accessibility for voters. As we move forward with this, we are looking at a model similar to what was used in the presidential election in 2020, where all registered voters in the city of Annapolis will be mailed absentee or mail-in ballot applications. And then they can return them if they choose to vote in that manner. That was done in the general election. In the primary for the presidential election, everyone got ballots. All registered voters got ballots. We are not taking that option at this time. We are looking at sending out applications for mail-in, otherwise known as absentee ballots. So a voter would return that. If they want to vote that way, they will return the application, and then a ballot will be sent to them. Yes, or
Eileen, are you okay to take questions as you go?
Well, if I could just get in one of the process, it might answer some questions, and maybe at the end of each one. How about that? Okay.
Thank you.
And so applications then will be returned, reviewed, and ballots mailed out to those applicants. Mail-in ballots can then be returned either through the U.S. Postal Service. They can be dropped off at drop boxes, which I'll also talk about today. They can also be on the day of the election brought into a voting or polling place and submitted then. So there'll be 3 different ways that those can be submitted. This is not taking the place of polling places. In fact, city code mandates that we have a polling place in each ward. we had, there had been talk about do drop boxes qualify as a polling place, and the board has decided not to go in that direction. So there'll be a polling place in each ward. Mail-in ballots can begin to be dropped off as soon as they are received and completed. All mail-in ballots must be submitted or postmarked by election day and received by the board by 10 a.m. on the day of the canvass, which is the Tuesday following the election. That increased deadline time is also something that had been presented to the city code and had been changed because we found in 2017 that time frame was too short. It was like the Wednesday or Friday after election day. And so we were getting ballots that were postmarked by election day but came in too late and couldn't be considered. So this will extend that a full week afterwards. Ballot drop boxes will be monitored and secured lock structures at convenient places for all voters. We are looking at either putting them one in each ward, possibly at the polling place, or maybe two in the city or other places, say City Hall and Pitt Moyer. That really hasn't been decided yet. Before I get more into drop boxes, were there questions about the mail-in ballots themselves?
Alderman Gay?
Alderman Gay? I'm sorry.
Thanks. You mentioned that only registered voters would receive the voting cards or the ballot. But Maryland has same-day voter registration. So what if someone wants to vote, they're not registered, but they can't go to the actual physical polling place? Would there be a procedure in place where they'd be able to, call in and get that ahead of time, or?
Well, they'll be similar to what we've done in the past elections. I mean, there's the opportunity to, we did it up, I think it was the Thursday and Friday, or the Friday and the Monday before election day. You could come into City Hall and you could apply for voter registration. So we still have to work some of that out because of staffing. The city of Annapolis also has a unique, so to speak, option of an emergency ballot. So if someone calls on the day of election and requests an emergency ballot, there's actually 2 election judges take a ballot to that person, but they would have to be registered at that point. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Alderman Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I had the same question when we had our primary, everyone was mailed a ballot, and then our general, everyone was mailed an application. If we're mailing out some paper, why don't we just mail in a ballot to them?
At this point, I think, speaking for the board, we're going with what seems to be more, I don't want to say agreeable, it's not quite the word, less challenging at this point in terms of a transition. When you mail out a ballot to everyone, you have that it's more ballots. There is some waste that might be involved with it. There's cost. And it seems, at least I think to the board, more of an easier transition to go to something that was done for the presidential election and the general election right now. It could continue to evolve. Rockville, they did send out ballots to everybody, and they are reconsidering it because sometimes there's challenges with getting those ballots to everybody, particularly the biggest with both issues, or with both options, is you have to have accurate addresses. Otherwise, they don't get to the people. And so you're dealing with more of those with sending out ballots to everybody as opposed to someone who's actually requesting them and wants it. Things like apartment buildings can actually add some obstacles to accessibility in terms of ballots getting to people. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes.
Okay. There's pros and cons to both of them. We thought also going with what was consistent with state law right now would be easier in terms of the transition also.
Okay, thank you.
Again, I just want to stress that mail-in voting does not replace in-person voting. There will be voting in each ward. As far as the drop boxes are concerned, they will be camera monitored 24/7. It looks like we will be able to use cameras that are either already in place at some of these polling locations or can be installed through the city. Placement would be about 30 days before. There would be probably twice a day pickups by a trained bipartisan crew that would pick up ballots, do an inventory, bring them back to the election office, and then have them double counted or just, counted again to make sure that they have been secure and kept in control. Again, counting ballots do not occur until after the election day polls close. That is part of city code. That was changed for Maryland in the presidential election, but we're going by city code at this point. So we feel that with that extended deadline, there's a week there, we should be able to get everything counted without difficulty. Any questions about ballot drop boxes?
Alderman Savage, then Alderman Finlayson.
Eileen, thank you very much for your work and the board's work on this. I know it's I guess anticipating where we'll be hopefully in September. I'm glad to hear that you'll be sending out requests for people to fill out if they want ballot. The one part though I didn't quite hear all of, which can you repeat some of your previous comments? I didn't quite hear all of that.
I'm sorry, as far as the drop boxes?
Yes. Well, sorry, in terms of, you said there was something about a week that you'll need. Is that a week after the election that you'll need to count all the absentee ballots and things like that? Right.
And the Board of Canvassers meets the Tuesday after the election. So that has a full week there. Because we expect to have a shift to have more mail-in ballots as opposed to what we've had in the past with in-person, it means that more votes will be counted. There'll be more, it will be more difficult in terms of ascertaining who winners are, possibly, because we won't really be able to tabulate them. I mean, the winners are still really declared at the canvass and not right after the election, but it will be a change. Depending on how many go mail-in versus in-person. Okay. Does that answer?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Alderman Finlayson, then Alderman Gay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Leahy, for keeping us up on what's going on. I think I heard you mention that there would be one polling place per ward. Is that a departure from the normal? Usually, there's two different polling places per ward.
Right. Well, that's my next section.
Oh, okay. I'll wait. I'll wait. Thank you.
Okay.
Alderman Gay.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So is it not possible as votes are mailed in to start is that illegal to start tabulating the count?
We can't do it per current city code.
Oh, okay. And so if there are, let's say, I'm just throwing this number out here. Let's say like 500 people vote in person and 5,000 vote via the mail. We would literally have to wait the week to see who the mayor would be?
Potentially. But you really technically you don't have your final results until the canvass anyway. But usually people are going to be used to having the tabulations from the voting machines that evening and then knowing how many provisionals are available. During the canvass, you're going to consider your provisionals and your absentee and mail-in voting then. In the past, that there have been some closed votes where that's really mattered and others it hasn't mattered. So it will change things in terms of knowing who's in the lead.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of polling places, as I'm sure you all are aware, that it's really important for consistent locations, accessible locations, well-staffed locations in promoting not only voter turnout, but also in trust and convenience and satisfaction. there's a trend of moving towards polling or vote centers, which if it were used in Annapolis, it would be like Pitt Moyer would be one center for the whole city. And no matter what ward you lived in, you could go and get your ballot for your ward and vote there. That's a trend in terms of overall nationwide. At this point, the city of Annapolis is not doing that. But we are looking to go to one polling place per ward. And there are several reasons for that. Again, looking at consistency. In wards, when we look at the polling places, many of them have, well, pretty much all of them have one polling place that's consistently been used in city elections. And the second one hasn't necessarily been the same. It's moved around, it's changed. A lot of this came about when the city was no longer able to use the schools for polling places. Again, we're anticipating that more people will be doing mail-in voting than in the past, and so there'll be less need in terms of having 16 staffed polling places as opposed to 8 polling places. Again, we're looking for consistency. Finding 2 locations in each ward can be challenging. Again, we're looking at accessibility, ADA compliance, central location, and that sort of thing. Again, we're hoping that with the mail-in voting option, this will provide a third option for voting for voters. So if you live in Ward 3 and you are voting by mail, you can put your ballot in any drop box or drop it off at City Hall. If you are living in Ward 3, you're still going to have a centrally located location for a polling place. That's the same in all of the wards. If you're in, now like in Ward 5 in the last election, that was a consolidated polling place and it worked very well. It was centrally located, lots of space, and the space should be able, it will also help us not have to, again, staff 16 polling places, find 16 polling places and staff 16 of them. Increasing the number of polling places does not necessarily increase access. In many situations, it may just spread it out and can produce confusion. So at this point, we're looking at 1 in each ward. And then, staffing for that.
Alderman Gay? Oh, sorry.
Alderman Finlayson can go first.
Alderman Finlayson, sorry, he had his hand up and I forgot you asked.
That's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ms. Leahy, does that mean that there is going to be one drop box per ward? In the presidential election, we had one drop box at Moyer. Is that going to be different? Or will there still be only one drop box in the city?
Well, we're looking at that. Actually, there were 2 drop boxes in the city of Annapolis. One was at Pitt Moyer and the other one was at Bates Middle School. That would be one way of going. The other way, which we're looking at, is to have one drop box in each ward. Probably, it could go different ways. It could go, the recommendation's been made to us to put a drop box in each ward at the polling place, where the polling place is going to be, once that's established. One of the things that we're looking at in terms of looking at the polling places and asking them if they will participate this year is, how do they feel about having a drop box there? And how do they feel about having it 24/7 monitored? That may be an obstacle for some locations, may not be comfortable with that. So we're in the process of looking at that. But it would be anywhere from 2 to 8. 2 would be, say, Pitt Moyer and City Hall. It could be 3, it could be 4, but probably going to be either 2 or 8 is my guess.
And who would be doing the monitoring? Would that be an extra responsibility for the Board of Elections? Or would our police, we use their camera system? Who would monitor the drop boxes?
We're still working out those details.
Okay. Thank you.
Alderman Gay?
Thanks. Madam Chair, would it be possible if, instead of looking at it through the boundaries of wards, maybe it's just looked at through location? Because in certain areas, it may be easier just to walk up to the drop box. But I'm thinking in Eastport, I know for at least in Ward 6, the one consistent voting location is always the Eastport the Eastport Community Center on President Street. But if you live in Bay Ridge Gardens, you either have to walk all the way up Tyler Heights through, all the way up Tyler Avenue or down Bay Ridge, up Hilltop and to the Eastport Shopping Center. If you live in Robinwood, you have to walk all the way down Tyler, down the Hilltop. And so and we're talking about communities where 1 in 5 have a vehicle. And so this just creates, I know it appears as it is creating making it difficult for people to vote. I know that's not the intended point, but that's why I'm asking, is it possible to look at it through just geographical location for voting centers instead of the individual ward boundaries?
So a voting center would probably not address that because it would be fewer polling locations. Your point is well taken in terms of making it accessible to all communities. And of course, the wards have very interesting boundaries in some areas. That's one of the things to consider that we're looking at in terms of drop boxes. So one idea would be you have a polling place in one precinct, but you have a drop box in the other precinct. It doesn't take away from the ability of getting from one place to the other. But we do have information supporting that in other elections, at least in presidential elections, people were able to get to, their locations. So it's certainly something being considered as to how we can make it the most available. If someone does have a long walk to get to a polling place, they certainly, again, mail-in option is a new option that would enable them to vote possibly in a more secure, easier way, especially if someone has some mobility problems or challenges.
Alderman Channelmeyer?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize if you got into this and I missed it because I'm just a little off my game today, or if it's going to be later in the presentation, you can just say so. Are we also going to be doing early in-person?
No. We have not historically done, we haven't done early voting in the past. It's not something that is available right now in terms of city code. There are some challenges with early voting. One of the things was new to me when we looked at it in the past elections was it's almost like running additional elections. It's like you're running an early primary, you're running a primary, you're running an early general, and you're running a general in large part because of the way that machines work and how things are counted. So in some ways, mail-in voting will help facilitate the concept of early voting. So some people would say that mail-in voting is a form of early voting. Will we have early in-person voting? No. Any other questions? That's about what I have in terms of presenting to you all, but I'm happy to discuss other questions if you have outside of those three areas. I mean, it's still a work in progress, even though it's getting closer.
Well, I just want to thank you for the work that you've done. And I was really proud in this last election of how Maryland's numbers came in so fast and so efficiently. And there wasn't the kind of drama that we saw around the country. So we truly appreciate it.
Yeah, I just got some statistics in, which I thought were kind of interesting. So for instance, in the presidential general election, say Ward 6 had 655 absentee or mail-in votes and 234 polling place votes. the same trend was found in all of the wards. Ward 8 had absentee ballots of 1,854 and a polling place voting of 260. When you compare that to the wards in terms of what they did in the 2017 elections, for instance, Ward 8 in 2017 for just the city elections, the polling place numbers were 1,659 and absentee were 130. So that's pretty much across the board in all of the wards.
So you said, Eileen, that they flipped. There was that many mail-ins were way above walk-ins.
Now, of course, I'm sure the COVID-19 was the big driving force for that. But in other areas, and again, the experience in Rockville that we had been talking to is that once people did it, they actually liked it. And in some areas, there have been really, every year, every time they do it, not only does voter turnout increase, but the satisfaction increases because it gives people options to vote. And it's a secure mechanism. You're still using paper ballots. They're still being counted in a consistent way. It's a third option.
Alderman Gay had his hand up, then Alderman Tierney. I know that you're going to stop the steal in the Annapolis election. Just joking. Too soon to make those jokes?
I got to put another resolution forward, man.
Have you discussed any approximate costs related with this? Because I don't know the cost to mail. I can't even remember the last time I mailed something, but I'm guessing maybe like $5 an envelope or whatever, everything packaged up in one. And if you're sending that to every house, is the cost the same as manning an individual location? Or will the primary be more expensive than the general?
The honest answer is I don't know. We do know that mail-in voting does have has expenses such as you mentioned in terms of postage, ballots. In the presidential election, you had the ability to actually download the ballot from your computer. We don't have that option for Annapolis. That would be something that MIT would have to develop, and that's not a direction we're going in right now. So yes, there are some costs that are associated with it. There's decreased costs in terms of consolidating to fewer polling places because one of the challenges is recruiting election judges, and also paying election judges is a cost. So I don't envision it being any cheaper, unfortunately. It may be a little more efficient, but some of those costs may be transferred. We are still waiting on. We haven't signed the city hasn't signed the MOU with the county in terms of the election. My understanding is that cost estimates are with the county executive at this point. And so when we get those back, we would certainly have more information about that.
Thank you. Alderman Tierney?
Yeah, I know the question was resolved, but I just want to comment that to Brooke's question about sending out ballots from the get-go, that would give our adversaries, the Trump followers, so much ammunition about these ballots going out to not unverified addresses and, flying into the bushes or whatever. So I'm glad that we have sort of that chain of custody with the ballots. And then since I'm on this pro-resident campaign, I just couldn't help but say Eileen is, a volunteer, and just we lose sight of how our residents help us run our government. So her and her husband live in Ward 1, and she should be commended for her tireless efforts and patience with us sometimes. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, and, a shout out also to Brianna and to Cliff, who also are putting in a lot of time. A quirk in the city code is they can't be with us today because it's a meeting, and with three of us, two makes a quorum. And so it precluded them, but they're aware of what we were discussing today, but thank you. Just one final note, which, I haven't brought up, maybe I heard you all talking about getting your vaccines. COVID. We do anticipate that COVID-19 is still going to be a factor for the elections in September and November. And we've been working with the emergency management staff in terms of getting PPE. We're hoping to maybe get some equipment and things like that from the county that they used in the last election that may not be, that may expire before they need to use it again in the next election. So we are working on that. There'll be social distancing, there'll be plexiglass. So all of those types of things will be set up to make it as safe as we possibly can in terms of COVID-19. Any other questions? You're an easy audience today.
Alderman Gay?
Are we still going electronic? I remember you guys talked about that briefly, but there was a like $75,000 cost or something associated with it.
Electronic? I'm not quite sure.
We talked that maybe I'm thinking of a different group then. There was going to be a way that we could submit forms electronically. I must be thinking of something else.
Oh, I know what you're thinking of. You're thinking of the campaign finance reports.
Oh, yeah.
We could do it for $300,000, and we thought maybe we would pass.
$300,000.
Yeah, so it was looked into. I am happy to report, though, that the campaign finance report forms, along with all of the forms, have been reviewed and revised. Having Susan Eckert on board has been great in terms of getting a lot of that up and running, which has been something that Regina has had to do in the past. And so having Susan on board has been really helpful. So all of those forms, I'm hoping, will be a little more user-friendly. They are on the website now. Also, Regina worked very hard in terms of the website, streamlining it. We've added some things like under how do I, someone can go in and find out how do I register to vote, which in the past has been part of city elections. But if you're new to town, you don't know about city elections. You just want to figure out how to vote. So that's been done. We've also created a candidate handbook, which pretty much tries to pull aspects of city code in regards to elections and make it a little bit more readable and user-friendly. And so when a person applies for their certificate of candidacy, they will get a copy, and also their treasurer will get a copy. And we are asking them to sign on the dotted line saying that they've reviewed it. It also includes information in terms of challengers and watchers. And that is currently available on the website. We still have a couple of things that we need to include in it, mostly some of the details and operations that we're still developing, but that is something new, and again, something that Susan worked on. Well, I'm happy to answer any questions. I think you all have my email. The Board of Elections meets every third Thursday of the month at 7 o'clock. Our next meeting is March 18th. We're always happy to have visitors and have people attend or observe. So if there's anything that we can look into or answer your questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to let us know.
Thank you so much, Arlene. Thank you. We truly appreciate you and the rest of the team. Thank you.
All right, great. Have a great rest of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item.
The next item is ID 4521, an update from the Maritime Zone Task Force. The presenter will be Ms. Eileen Fogarty.
Do any of you guys know Eileen Fogarty?
Hi, good afternoon. And that was fascinating and encouraging to hear how many people are taking advantage of the alternative approaches to voting. Thank you so much for taking time on this beautiful day to meet with our task force. I want to make sure as we get started that Julian has the presentation up for all of you. Julian? Terrific. So this afternoon, next slide, please. This afternoon, you are going to hear from our task force members with recommendations that they've been working on, as well as some areas of consensus. We would ask that they be able to share all their recommendations with you first, and then we'll open it up, not just for discussion with the council, but to hear your ideas and your direction on how we can really do something exciting in the Maritime Districts. Next slide. The city's had a long commitment to the maritime industry for many years. And one of the reasons for this is that those districts provide views through to the water, openness. They provide an area where the community can walk. So there's been strong support for the districts for the past 30 some years. So with that said, the next slide, I'm going to turn over to Sally Nash, Dr. Nash.
Thank you. This task force is part of our comprehensive plan that we're working on, and its purposes are threefold. And that has to do with strengthening the maritime industry, ensuring there's a sustainable future for maritime districts, that they're not going to go away, and making sure that everyone who lives in Annapolis has a chance to participate in the water in some form or fashion. In order to make sure we achieve those purposes, we thought a lot about our stakeholders and who should be in the meetings. And we reached out through you, with your help, to residents, to maritime industry property owners, to people who have environmental interests in the city and are active on environmental issues, as well as other public interests like the Maritime Museum and members of the Planning Commission. We've also have some other stakeholders who you will hear from today, including Wendy Sullivan from National Park Service. Next slide. This is going to, we wanted to look comprehensively at the maritime districts because they're so important to our city, and they were part of our last comprehensive plan, and strengthening them was part of our last comprehensive plan. But in this comprehensive plan, we really want to put forward some strategies that we can implement every year, have some goals that we can meet every year to improve the industry and make sure that it's going to be, make sure that our approach is strategic and can really get implemented this time around. Thank you.
Next slide. So with that said, I want to just take a couple minutes, and I know some of you were here when all of this happened and some of you were not. So how did we get here? Let's go back in time to the mid-1980s. There was, and a lot of this will sound very familiar to you, there was tremendous pressure on the waterfront. The city marina had just been built in the place of two longtime working boatyards. The land pressures and the land prices, the pressures on the land and the prices were increasing, driving these maritime districts up. The maritime industry and the businesses were very concerned that they were going to be priced out, that they couldn't compete with condominiums, hotels, office buildings. There was a large project on the site that when you go over the Eastport Bridge is immediately to your left. The yacht club is there now. The Maritime Hotel, that was in the pipeline. So you had the fear of the industry being priced out and the fear of the residents that the waterfront would be privatized, that they wouldn't be able to, people wouldn't be able to walk with their dogs. They wouldn't be able to see the water. It would be hotels and condominiums. So these pressures brought together the initial effort. The community and the industry with the property owners came to agreement on a strategy. And the strategy is still in place today. It's based on an economic approach that we need to retain our working boatyards and our industry, and we need to make sure we're providing the land to support these critical uses. Next slide. So with that said, 4 districts were created, each very, very different. but with the intent, the very clear intent in each district, keep out the incompatible uses. Residential uses are incompatible with working yards, and limit competing uses, such as offices that'll drive up the cost of the land. So next slide. District that you all are very familiar with is our city dock, Maritime Conservation District. The emphasis here was on water access, public access. It is by far the most flexible district, retail, restaurant, and it has the greatest amount of non-maritime. That starts with the yacht club and goes around to 110 Compromise. Next slide, please. One of the most complex districts is the mixed maritime. That is the district in Eastport on Spa Creek. And that district starts at the bridge to First and then from Severn to the water. And the intent here, because this district had the most pressure on it, was to subsidize the existing working maritime uses. Think about the Yacht Haven Yard, the uses on Pier 4. On Templeton's site, you had backyard boats. So this is where the concept of triggers came and has been applied to the entire, to all the maritime districts. And that is, there are certain uses that the city and the industry needs. A 20,000 square foot working yard, a 30-ton lift, 25,000 square feet of on-land boat storage. We also had seafood processing in it, which has gone by the wayside with McNasby's. So the idea was, if you kept these uses, you could subsidize those uses by having a small amount of non-maritime or restaurant use in exchange. In this district, it was 30%. Next slide. So the next district is the WME, and both the Maritime Eastport, it's the old Sarles and Petrini lots, which are now South Annapolis Yacht Center. It's the yacht club's sailing center, Eastport Yacht Club, and it's the backside of Eastport. It's 146 parcels and about 27 acres. This is hard maritime. There's smaller sites, many of them, but it's all maritime. Service, yards, marinas. And the goal here was to keep it maritime. They can have a small deli or with a trigger, a very small 2,000 square foot restaurant. And then the largest district, the next one, please, Julian, is the WMI. There are over 60 acres in this district. It's a big district. You have 40 parcels, and these parcels are land intensive. You have a 17-acre parcel at Port Annapolis, 20 acres at Jabin's Yard. It's the intent here is for the working yards to be buffered from the residential and to support the marinas, showers, pools, but overall to make sure we have land for our working boat yards and the services. Next slide. So these districts have served the city well for 30 some years, and there have been numerous studies, but they all conclude the same way, that we need to support our maritime districts. Next slide. This brings us to where we are today. So if you look at these, I know you love these charts. If you look at the third blue circle across the top, that's where we are today. The task force was kicked off on November 20th. They've had working team meetings, outreach to the community, outreach to the industry, meeting with the Planning Commission, and they have had 2 large task force meetings. Where we are today, we will be going back to the commission. We will have on the 30th of March, there'll be another large task force meeting, and we will be planning to come back to you, the council, in May. Next slide. So with that said, I want to turn this over to the incredible group of people who have been working on this so diligently, so you can hear what is their strategic approach. This is not about helping one property owner or another. It's about providing real waterfront access to everybody in this city. It's about actually making the districts and the industry stronger and healthier, figuring out how we can meet the expectations of the residents, and then what are the right uses and triggers. So the next slide goes to Susan Zellers.
Before Eileen,
I'm going to go. I was going to save the questions till the end, please.
Okay.
Thanks.
Next slide for Susan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Zellers. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director of the Marine Trades Association of Maryland, which is a 501c6 organization located right here in Annapolis. In fact, located in one of the marinas here, Port Annapolis Marina. So we service the whole state of Maryland, but I have a long history and background of servicing the city of Annapolis. Many of you might remember I was the Economic Development Director many years ago, 20 years ago to be exact. So anyways, I thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. So keeping the maritime industry strong in Annapolis, that is sort of the whole key to what we're trying to do here as we look to tweak these districts and make them the most productive that we can and keep Annapolis sort of the destination that they are for the maritime industry. If you look at where we are today, we can no longer afford to lose any of the essential services here. So we don't build boats here anymore. We do still have a great and vibrant service industry here. And we do have a lot of the ancillary industries that or businesses that support the industry. But what we can't see happen is we don't want to see this turn into just slips. Without the servicing of the industry, we won't be the hub that we are today. So keep in mind, this industry operates on extremely low margins. And we see, of course, an increase in land values and environmental expenses that result in increased rent. So balancing those two things is what we need to do in order to keep this industry strong moving forward. Could I have the next slide, please? Good news is that we have some great opportunities presenting themselves to us right now. 2020 was a difficult year for a lot of folks, but not for boat sales. We saw a 12% increase nationally in boat sales. So with that, we see a great capacity for growth and room for new businesses and startups within this industry. What we have here in Annapolis, because of the zoning, is a hub, a marketplace, a one-stop shop for both residents and for visiting boaters. That's what we want to continue to maintain and really see happen. So again, we want to see this marketplace continue to show the full array of services. As I said on the last slide, slips alone are not the key to the industry's future. Could I have the next slide, please? So as we look at where we are here within the Mid-Atlantic, there's more marinas in Maryland than there are from New Jersey to Maine. And Anne Arundel County registers more boats than any other county in Maryland. The Maritime Districts provide $2.4 million in property tax here to the city. And in the state of Maryland, we're a $3.5 billion industry that employ more than 13,000. So we're a pretty significant industry here. For jobs, the Marine Trades Association of Maryland 6 years ago went for a grant from Earn Maryland, and we have a Marine Trades Industry Partnership for Workforce Development. This is an entirely employer-driven workforce development effort that's located right here in Annapolis, but we service, as I said, the whole state. What this group does, what we do is we take young people at the start of their careers and we put them into 6-week on-the-job training practicums so that they can sample what it's like to work within the industry. Many of our partners are here today. Rod Jabins, one of our partners, was in the initially when we first started this. So what we did was listen to our employers, and they all said, well, we're all gray-haired and there's no young people coming and getting involved in the industry. What can we do? And this is what we did, was to put this partnership together. These on-the-job training practicums have been so successful that we're now in line to have a full apprenticeship for marine technology here in Maryland. and the classroom learning that is required of any apprenticeship. 144 hours of classroom is required. We just got word this week that Anne Arundel Community College will be putting in a class, as well as Cecil and Chesapeake, who are already on the path to having the curriculum. So that'll be 3 counties within the state of Maryland and the community colleges carrying the classroom component that's needed for full-blown apprenticeships. So we have tremendous opportunity here for both jobs and training. Next slide, please. So looking at keeping the industry strong, the industry agreed on the fact that any uses have to support the health of the maritime industry. So residential uses are not compatible with the maritime districts. Restaurants can very much be compatible with the maritime districts, provided as they're located within working yards that they're servicing the slip holders who are using that marina. They're servicing the transient boater that comes and goes, and also the workers within the yard. The other important thing is that there are certain triggers that allow for any non-maritime uses. Triggers might include now the boat yards, 20,000 square foot boat yards, travel lifts, on the water fuel stations, etc. So those triggers are also important, as they are what allow any non-maritime use.
Susan, thanks so much. Patrick.
Hi,
Next
guys.
slide, and Patrick.
Hi guys, Patrick Shaughnessy here. I'm president, owner of Far Yacht Design, based in Eastport, and also resident in Eastport. Right, so if we seek to stem the shrinking of the local maritime industry, what we can't afford is to lose any more of the businesses we have. As you heard from Susan, the fact is the global maritime industry isn't shrinking. In other places, it's vibrant, healthy, and growing. And our businesses are actually being actively recruited to move to other progressive areas that see a value in maritime industry, and they're willing to take steps to secure the businesses. Those efforts include rent assistance, deferred taxes, and other really substantial financial supports. What I would say is that any healthy industry has several key sectors. They're typically defined as primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. Primary, concerned with extraction of raw materials, so that's not really applicable here, but secondary is concerned with manufacturing, tertiary with providing services, and quaternary consisting of information around those services. So the decline of health of our local maritime industry has really been highlighted by the loss of the secondary manufacturing sector. We've lost boat building, mast making, sail making, and other major components of a holistic, healthy industry center. And we're at the risk of a complete collapse of the secondary sector, which would completely relegate Annapolis to tertiary services and quaternary business sectors. Initially, manufacturing comes under pressure intranationally because of tax rates and other subsidies, but it also faces substantial pressure internationally due to relatively high labor rates. Recent trends indicate that appreciation of quality craft goods can accommodate cost that allows locally produced goods to be market competitive again. And an industrial shift toward robotics really offsets some of the high labor rates and makes shipping costs a larger component of internationally sourced manufactured goods. Both of those trends indicate that local manufacturing has an opportunity to be competitive again and contribute towards a more healthy secondary, tertiary, quaternary industry relationship locally. Next slide, please. Having the key zones identified and protected is an advantage for Annapolis and its goal of fostering a healthy maritime industry. Within those zones, now we must work tirelessly to protect what's become a critical density of industry components. We can't afford to lose any more businesses, so we must stem our losses. We have to take the steps to ensure that our local businesses are healthy and provide them with very generous support. We have to ensure that our terms here are as good as the ones that are being offered by their suitors. We have to employ the same tactics being used against us. We have to build our local industry through recruitment, commit government support to our businesses, and business support to our businesses to achieve that growth. And I would say that we can make things again in Annapolis. Our city, our clubs, our businesses, and our citizens all purchase and use and maintain products that were manufactured somewhere. Why not here? And we can rally behind Annapolis Made. We can use it as a shared commitment within our city, our clubs, our businesses, and our citizenry to make something special here again. In everything that we're working hard to do in our businesses, we need the city to be a partner rather than an impediment. We need the city to help us help ourselves by streamlining the permitting process for maritime uses. We need the city to help us explore tax credits, rent capping, special tax districts so that the industry can achieve health and in turn density. And we have an opportunity, I think, in allowing new uses inside the maritime zones to create a grant program that effectively is funded by the new uses and directly benefits the core maritime industry. That way we will have treated the symptom of maritime zone vacancies, but we would have also addressed the core problem of industry health. Next slide, please. So we know that to raise the profile of the local industry, that's one of our primary jobs. And honestly, the easiest thing we can do is promote and market the heck out of the things that we have and the things that we want to become. We need to attract like-minded residents, transit users, businesses, clients for our businesses, and workers for our businesses. And honestly, we can't continue to passively trade on the historic goodwill of our past industry success. We have to build new successes, and we have to use all the tools we have to promote and market ourselves. But by itself, promotional and marketing won't get us all the way there. It needs to be combined with every other tool we have in our arsenal to make the combined thing a success. Just anecdotally, I'd say that when our boat Ilbrook won the 2002 Volvo Ocean Race, Michael Ilbrook told me this really interesting thing. He said, if he had spent 8 million euros and lost the race, it would have been expensive. But instead, spending 25 million euros to ensure that he won the race was cheap. And I think this is going to feel a little bit like that. It would be expensive if all we did was promote and market our effort, but it would be cheap if we threw the whole kitchen sink at it and we ensured that we ensured our goals were achieved for real industry health.
Patrick, always terrific. 2 slides up, and Wendy O'Sullivan, who is the superintendent for the National Park Service in Chesapeake Bay.
Great, thank you. Hi, all. Wendy O'Sullivan. I'm the superintendent for the National Park Service Chesapeake Bay office. We're based here in Annapolis for many, many years and plan to make it ongoing and growing in our partnership here in Annapolis. I'm really glad to be part of the water access team under the Maritime District Task Force. Our team is really here today to provide an update on our work related to water access as the task force has been moving forward. Our work has focused on supporting the sustainability of the maritime industry. And I'm also excited to share that we also have focused very purposefully on the actions and opportunities that can improve and expand equitable access for all Annapolitans to connect with, experience, and get on the water across the districts. So I look forward to staying engaged with the task force as community needs and projects are identified through this process that align with a program that the NPS runs called Chesapeake Gateways, and look forward to finding opportunities to collaborate and bring NPS support to move projects forward as things proceed. So with that just basic opening, just share with this map, it's just giving you a quick sense of all of the opportunities to connect people to the places and spaces across the districts, and that we're looking as a team at the ways to make those, like I said, more accessible and improve some of them, maybe even add to them. So I'll pass now to Mike to then talk through some of the pieces that we've been looking at related to triggers and other opportunities.
Wendy, thanks. Next slide, Mike.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Eileen. My name is Mike Tomasini. I am a maritime business owner in Eastport since 2003. What Wendy said is kind of a preview of what we've been working on in our group, which is to find ways to, number one, keep the industry vibrant and keep the property owners filled with tenants, and also to try and find ways within these zones to improve the community's access to the water, whether it's by enhancing the properties that we already do have. The city has a pretty good network of street end parks and water access sites. So, to make those more visible to the community so that you know that they're there, what they're best for. We've been talking a lot in the group about cataloging these different properties as to which ones are good for, say, fishing or crabbing, and which ones might be better as a car top launch or a walk down the street and launch your paddleboard. We had talked about in our group some more universal signage that designates these places as access for the public, as opposed to, you just walk down to the end of the street and you're not sure whether or not you can use it. So that was one of the big pieces. We've also talked extensively about potential for new street end parks, new public-private partnerships to expand the existing network of street end parks and water access sites, and also the possibility of acquiring private property that's not currently available to the public. Next slide. Some of the things that we've been trying to focus on are what are going to be the real game changers for the communities that surround the Maritime Districts. So if we're talking about making the landlords and the tenants and the industry as a whole more vibrant, how are we also going to include a piece that makes things better for the residents in the surrounding communities? And a couple of the things that we've kind of put towards the top are, like I said before, investments into the street end parks. This would be private money to help expand or enhance or maintain continuously street end parks. We've also talked about the development of potential community boating facilities, someplace where residents can store their paddlecraft or their rowboats and have access to a floating dock to launch them without having to ever get in their car. Walk down the street, put your kayak in the water, and get paddling. One of the other things we realize is that a lot of these communities in the Maritime Districts, the residents are feeling parking pressures. So part of that was, if you're a maritime property owner and you want to help lessen the impacts on parking for the local residents, there might be some kind of shared affordable parking that might get commercial use vehicles or employees of local businesses off of the streets and allow better access for resident parking. We've also talked extensively about the availability of a public waterfront promenade, someplace where you can actually get out and take a look at the water with either picnic facilities or even just a stroll along the water, continuous stroll along the water. Down in the second tier, we're talking about things that I think are important to all of us: the access for the paddle sports, the ability to put your feet into the water, the ability to hop on a water taxi and go from Spa Creek to Back Creek, and dedicated slip space for businesses like mine or Annapolis Canoe and Kayak, which are affordable ways. You don't have to own a boat, but if you want to get out on the water, you can use it that way. Next slide. If we're looking at the map, go ahead.
I was just going to say, did you want to speak to that, or was Eric going to?
Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here for a quick second, just to kind of acknowledge that, while the task force is certainly focusing on access opportunities within the districts themselves, and particularly within the properties that make up the districts, from a comprehensive planning perspective, and the fact that we're doing a comprehensive plan right now, there's obviously a citywide emphasis on equitable access to the water. And I just wanted to highlight a few of these active initiatives that are happening right now. I think some of them are very clear in what the opportunities are, and then others we're trying to figure out how we can maximize access. And there are others that we're looking at as well, but these are some of the higher profile, highly visible initiatives that we're working on. So we're not operating in a vacuum here with this task force. It's very much integrated with kind of a citywide perspective on access.
And Eric has done a terrific job. Mike, back to you. Up 2 slides, Julian.
I'm back again, Mike Tomasini. I am also a resident. My home adjoins the Maritime Waterfront Maritime Eastport. So I'm familiar with the zones and the properties in there. As we said before, there's always a third piece to this. There's the commercial property owners, their tenants, of course, which make up the maritime industry, and then, of course, the residents. So we're trying to find ways to kind of dovetail all this. And some of those things that we've realized in the discussions is that, we do want to maintain a critical mass, if you were, of maritime possibilities within the districts. You want to be able to store your boat on the land. You want to be able to have a place to keep it in the water that's close to where you live. We want to be able to see the water and feel the openness that the waterfront brings to the community. If it's redeveloped with condos, or as Eileen said all those years ago, a maritime hotel, then you start to get the feel that that the community has been kind of shielded from the waterfront, and that's exactly what we're trying to keep from happening. We'd like to keep the working waterfront, that kind of nautical feel that you get when you're walking through these districts and you see boats on trailers or travel lifts hauling boats to be maintained. That's kind of what we call the zeitgeist over here in Eastport that makes people feel good about where they live. We want to be able to strengthen the districts by bringing in uses that potentially support those maritime operators. And, that discussion is ongoing. We want to maintain the triggers so that we can promote those hard maritime uses, the real guts of the maritime industry are boats on jack stands and work being done. So we're looking away from residential uses and more towards the commercial uses that preserve the maritime industry as a whole. And then, as I said before, we really want to increase access to the water in places where it's deemed safe or appropriate to do so. Next, still me.
Next slide. You've talked to this, but you can throw it out again.
Yeah, I think I'd just be repeating myself. So
okay, water access. Thanks so much, Rod Javen. 2 slides up.
So hi, I'm Rod Javen. I'm the owner and operator of the Javen Yacht Yard on Edgewood Road, and part of that hard maritime industry that you've heard others talk about tonight. And what we're talking about here is what are the challenges to the maritime industry, and what can we do with uses that we can identify that would help strengthen the maritime industry. And that's what this effort is all about, is strengthening the maritime industry and identifying where we can make changes in the zoning or in the code to allow the marinas, not only here in WMI, but also the other zones to be successful in the future. So the one thing that we've identified is that restaurants seem to be identified as a great contributor to the success of the marinas. All up and down the coast, you'll see most marinas have a restaurant or bar attachment to them so that you can walk up and get a meal and get a refreshment. The difference is that, right now only a small deli with less than 10 seats is allowed in our zone, and that's not big enough to create any value or any even financial sense. We've all struggled with the delis and trying to make sense of those and trying to make them successful. But Anne Arundel County, right next to our sites, allows restaurants and stuff. And I'll give you a good example. I'm right across Edgewood Road from Chesapeake Harbor Marina. Chesapeake Harbor is in the county and we're in the city. Chesapeake Harbor has a restaurant called Sam's on the waterfront. You may be familiar with that. But it's a wonderful experience when you go over there and they have outdoor dining and a restaurant opportunity, and it just enhances the entire marina experience. And so we think that restaurants are going to enhance and be very compatible with the restaurants. And again, that you have to have the triggers that support that, because we're not suggesting that the zones be replaced with restaurants, but enhance the marinas with the documented triggers that allow that to happen. So I talked a little bit about the competitive disadvantage, where right across the street from me, less than 1,000 feet as the crow flies, you can get that outdoor experience in a restaurant. But here in the city of Annapolis, we can't. It's not allowed. And part of that is the code was written in 1987, and it really, it's important to allow the code to evolve as the marinas evolve. And we have changed quite significantly since the late 80s. And it's very important. And we're just trying to catch up right now. The restaurants, again, I think I've said enough about that, but they do attract boaters as an opportunity for transient dockage. One of the things they look for is an experience where they don't have to leave the marina. They can get, the marinas are turning into more of a resort operation than anything else, where you do not have to leave the marina to get meals or do laundry or work out in a gym or have venues that you can enjoy yourself. So we think that that's a priority. I guess I'm ready for the next slide. So as you've heard, the uses that contribute to the success of the hard maritime activities is this idea of restaurants and outdoor dining. And of course, we're still working on the standards for parking and size and noise. All of those come with challenges, but we have a good base, which is WMM. The restaurants are allowed in the WMM zone. And so it's a great place to start with the standards that are in place over there. Again, they're modest sized restaurants. I'm not talking anything as big as, the Chart House or anything like that, but these are just modest restaurants that would enhance the marina experience. The other thing that we've identified is the concept of these outdoor venues. Again, if we look at Anne Arundel County and what's available out there, if we look at Harrington Harbor as an example, which is in South Anne Arundel County, they have created a resort experience down there that has gazebos and outdoor pavilions where they can create this idea of multi-purpose gathering spaces, from weddings to private parties to other outdoor activities that again, go back to enhancing the whole marina experience. And that's the direction that we need to focus. And again, hopefully we'll be coming to you to allow the code to evolve to support the success and future of the marinas and the maritime zones here in Annapolis.
Next slide.
So we've talked about this idea of triggers and incentives. And so the initial, like I said, nobody is talking about adding a restaurant and taking away any maritime. The restaurants would only be available if you had existing triggers that are in place. And those triggers are things that we commonly identify as hard maritime stuff. Like, you need to have at least a 30-ton travel lift. You need to have at least 20,000 square feet of working boatyard, 25,000 square feet of on-land boat storage, boat clubs. Seafood processing is probably not valid anymore, but also another concept that's very important to us is the idea of fuel docks and fuel stations. Being able to get fuel to the boats is very, very important. And it's important to sustain those, because it's very, very expensive to supply the fuel docks on the water. And we need to make sure that they are in place. This idea of incentives, we've talked about how big a hot button this public waterfront access is. And again, not to belabor the point, but the maritime zones here in Annapolis are very, very complicated. And if you take the WMI zone, we're kind of hard maritime and doing our thing over here and are healthy and are strong. If you look at the WMM zone, maybe they struggle from a standpoint of trying to keep all of their spaces full, all of their leased spaces full. And so this idea of incentives says if you can provide waterfront access to the community, we will consider modest increases in non-maritime use. If you offer access to your facility with a water taxi and publicly accessible, affordable boating, we will look at modest increases in your non-maritime operation. And also another incentive that we have identified is the idea of on-site resident local business parking to provide, as everybody knows, Annapolis City Marina has a lot of parking, and some of that is underutilized, and to be able to make that available for residents or local business parking would be a benefit to the community, and that would be an incentive to look and adjust the non-maritime use. So in modest ways.
Rod, thanks so much. And Dr. Scott is going to conclude it for everyone. Next slide. Do we have Dr. Scott?
Yes, I'm right here. Thank you very much. It's been a real privilege to be part of this group. You've heard so many people speak so articulately and thoughtfully about the issues that we've all been addressing together. And it's really exciting, I think, to see that we've come together in a consensus at this point to bring the material that we've been discussing with you today. I think the real reason that I was asked to participate is because I'm old. I'm old enough to, I have a son older than a couple of the current council members, so that gives you some idea. And I've been in Annapolis long enough to have retired after 30 years on the Planning Commission, including my early years when this legislation was, these zones were created through legislation. And so I've seen them operate all of these years. And I think that what I want to say to the mayor and the council members today is that most Annapolitans understand that the maritime industry is part and parcel of the heritage of Annapolis. It's part of the reason Annapolis was built and created here around our harbor. We can see all around us as we move around the community how much a part the maritime experience and the maritime businesses and industries are to our present. And I'm really going to try and speak to the community, the citizens, and their interest in this part of their community so that we can think about keeping it part of the future for all of us. And one of the things I want to reference is many of you who are participating today knew Mike Myron, who was sort of the historian of Eastport. And one of the things that he did is to interview many people who were important in the Eastport community for many reasons. And one of those interviews that I recently had the opportunity to read the transcript of the interview was with Rob Slauson, who was the president of the Eastport Civic Association when the original zoning was discussed and created. And what Rob said in that interview to Mike's questions was essentially what the citizens have been saying to us in our outreach and even among the members of the Maritime Task Force. And that's what I was just sharing with you. It's part of our heritage. It's an important part of our present, and we want it to remain part of our future. So go back 35 years, the community was interested in seeing that this part of our industry, our commercial community and our residential community flourish. That hasn't changed in all of the information that we have gathered. And so I want to sum up by saying we've built a consensus, and you've heard the content, the important aspects of that consensus, including increasing access to through the water, increasing the quality of life and the business and commercial opportunities of residents, property owners, and business owners. And I think that we all, speaking for the group, want to see this zoning, which has been so instrumental in keeping the maritime industry here and healthy. We want to take this opportunity to improve it. We want to allow it with your actions to adapt, to change with changing circumstances, and then to allow this community, this industrial, maritime and residential community, not just to be static and to sort of hold on by its fingernails, but to grow and to be a vital part of our community's future. So thank you for those few minutes.
Thanks so much, Will. And now the last slide, you can see what an amazing group we have. And these are just a few of the people on this task force working together. Would like to open it up to the council. And I know Alderman Gay has a question because he had one back on water access.
Alderman Gay, thank you for your patience. I appreciate letting them finish. Alderman Gay.
Thank you guys very much. It was a great presentation. And so I have a number of questions, but let me just first say I'm glad that we're taking this step. I think that the zoning should be tweaked. I had a personal experience where, yeah, I'm glad it's being tweaked. I had a personal experience where I was working with a job that was in the maritime industry. And because it dipped under 30%, I believe because one of the sailing businesses left, you know, they had to move out other businesses. And luckily we found a location in the city of Annapolis, but we would have lost, you know, businesses. We did anyway. I think the other three left to different areas. And so I think it should be fixed for those reasons. But I also like the examples of restaurant and outdoor venues that were mentioned later on. But let me get into some of my questions. My first being, in this approach, how can it be made equitable? And I say that across a number of things. And please do not take offense to this. I talk about diversity all the time because it's important. Equitable in terms of, I think there's only one Black-owned marina in the city of Annapolis. Please correct me if I'm wrong. It's just across from Davis's Pub, I believe. Yep. And so with a city of such rich history of, you know, maritime business, you know, which a lot of that was focused in working class African-American communities, there is not, you know, representation of our communities in these businesses currently. I commend the internship or apprenticeship program. I think that is significant. And if we can, you know, expose that to the communities and maybe get people engaged and involved, that would be extremely helpful, because that could be a path that someone, you know, may want to go down, but they just don't know it exists. So equitable in regards to the jobs, I guess that's the start, but equitable in regards to ownership, because that's the true key. If there's only one Black-owned marina in the entire city, and all the marinas are going through updates or the zoning's changing or whatever, there's a significant investment in the water industry. That's not fair at all. And so I think that should be looked at in regards to, you know, I don't know, I'd be open to sit at the table and discuss with the task force or members who, you know, are interested. So that was my first question. And then my second question is, how significant of an investment are we looking to get major return on if we change something like this and fully say that we are making ourselves a maritime capital? Because if we're looking around, I was just talking to friends about this the other day, driving through the city. We're like, what are we? We're not a tech space. We're not a, you know, ag space. You know, water is our thing, but we aren't producing massive amounts of jobs from it or massive amounts of money. You just said that we get $2.4 million in tax from that. So how can we fully invest in the maritime industry to the point that we are creating careers for our citizens, and also that we're creating a large enough revenue and tax base that the city is getting a return? Because otherwise, are we at the point where we should start saying, like, look, let's bring in these tech businesses in these spaces, because that's where the money is at. So how can we get the best bang for our buck in the maritime industry?
Alderman Gay, you have hit the hardest topics. The very first of all, the job training. I think there is more that we can do, and I'll let in a minute Susan talk to this, to make sure that it's not just that we have these programs available, but we are reaching out so people know they're available and they are making this part of their career choice. That would be the first. But the other, I'm going to turn this to Patrick, in terms of how do we invest so that there's a real return. Patrick, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can respond on that. I don't have a number for you, like as such. What I can say, more of sort of a proof of concept sort of thing, is that there are other places in the U.S. and internationally that see enough value, in building a large density of marine business, enough to invest in it to do it. So I would say that at a proof of concept level, it's other places have proven it worthwhile. Whether what that number is and whether we can achieve it in the short term, I certainly can't answer without thinking about it a bit. I can only give you sort of anecdotally, I can tell you that our business is actively recruited quite often to move. And those kinds of things are, moving costs covered for the business, for the employees, taxes deferred for years, matching research funds, those kinds of things. So some of the things other places are doing are substantial. They're not inconsequential investments. So the magnitude of costs could be significant, I think is the only fair way to phrase that without a real number.
And I think the other thing I'd like to add is we will put together, it probably won't be for a couple of weeks, but I will bring together several of the owners and the people in the industry with Alderman Gay and anyone else who is interested to look at, one, how do we do much greater outreach for the job training? But the bigger question, that I think is very doable. The bigger question is there a way with ownership of these businesses that we can make it more diverse? So Alderman Gay, I will commit to getting because it's a terrific question, and I don't know how tough the answer is, but I will get a group of people together with you and anyone else who's interested, because you think about it, we have one owner, and that's Marcellus. And Severn Sailing, the Commodore at Severn Sailing, I'm going to invite him as well, because he could shed some light on that.
Yeah, this is, and I think this is great. The presentation was fantastic. And to Patrick's point, if other areas are enticing him in a way like that, we should be doing the same to keep him here. And I am fine with creating, we can't do tax cuts because the council doesn't, we do regulate property tax, but we don't want to regulate other taxes. I think that's the way to go. If we're going to be the maritime place, go all in, create the incentives, give the dollars for research so that we can bring people here and create the careers, not just jobs. That is what's so important, so that people are making dollars in this city. And so if this is the way we're going to go, then, we should go all the way so we can keep business like his. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The one thing I would add there is that the most recent large offer we had was to a city in France called Vannes. And the offer was layered with the local town made some of the offering, whether I can't remember if it was the moving costs they were covering, and they had isolated a particular property for us. And then there was the research matching was coming from France's, federal government. So there were layers of how the offer was built. but it was compiled by the local leadership, locally there in the township to create the offer. So I recognize that Annapolis can't do it all, but it's part of a layered approach.
Alderman Tierney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you all. It's a wonderful presentation, and one of the most positive things I heard was the training available at the community college. That's what's really important. I'm not an economist. I'm Alderwoman Award 1, and I just want to speak a little bit about lessons learned. Frankly, highest and best use and the cost of the land has not served us well. It's given us limited choices, the high land costs. And I have one question, but then I just want to just give my opinion. I think you've realized that we have to drill down and solve the high rents, and the high rents are due to high land costs, owners wanting their return on investment. And this is a huge problem. I mean, and so that's non-conducive to when I hear you want to bring back, I don't want to say mom and pop stores, but entrepreneurs, sale making, boat building, mass. So I think there was a bullet saying that we would look perhaps for tax credits and maybe TIFs or something, but I think you really got to be cautionary on the whole restaurant thing. That has not served us well at City Dock. And that's where highest and best use is equated to a restaurant. And what we had down at City Dock, we lost a maritime business because of the cost of the land. And that was, that's a huge lessons learned. We couldn't support a huge maritime business at City Dock. And we tweaked the zoning so that a restaurant could come in, and we waited years for this thing to get bigger and bigger to get the amount of tables to pay the rent. That's what you're going to open up. That's what you're going to open up if you start looking at restaurants coming in. You don't want them to be the driver. I just want to caution you about that. If you want to focus on sale making and businesses and high density, getting in and maybe addressing the rent, just be cautious of that. That will. I strongly believe that will destroy maritime if we give restaurants the red light to go in first.
So Ellie, if I could just respond, because I agree, and I think most of the people on the task force would agree with everything you've said. The approach, and this is more specific for the WMI, where you have these huge parcels, is very small. When I say small restaurants, to give you an analogy, Chart House is around 9,500 square feet. The Yacht Club, I think each level is about 6,000. And what they're looking at over there is maybe something like a 4,000 square foot restaurant, but you couldn't have it unless it was basically tied to the working maritime. So the only sites that would get it, would be able to have it, would be the very large, the large marinas and the large boat yards. And there seems to be some support for this in the WMI in order to help those districts or help those yards. There in WME, which is Eastport, there are really only a couple of sites that would qualify. And there's been discussion not dissimilar from what you said. So we're going to have to see. We go out to Eastport next week. We'll see what people say. But what we're seeing right now is clearly it seems to work on those very large sites on Bemby Beach. And we're not sure about Eastport. We'll have to hear from the residents.
Yeah, I think as long as you're looking at it as a service to the maritime area of which it's in and not the driver, because then there's a point of no return there. So thank you. Thank you for listening to me. I feel passionate about that.
Alderman Savage and then Alderman Arnett is probably the main driver why we're all here. So Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And first of all, thank you to the task force and Eileen. I've heard versions of this presentation on a number of occasions now, and I'm always impressed with the level of analysis that you all have brought into this. But onto my comments, and because WMI is it's the largest district, and it is in all of it's in Ward 7. So it's a pretty big deal for our ward, and we have a very vested interest in making sure these districts survive. So as far as the WMI, I'm certainly open to allowing some kind of greater percentage of non-maritime use, especially considering there's 0 non-maritime allowed now, except for the cafes. But as far as a percentage, I don't know, maybe 10%, and then you allow a few, maybe a few more with if any of the incentives are met. Or such as the fuel dock and those kind of things. But I really would be cautious about seeing too much because I don't want to, I think that risks eroding some of the intention of the zoning if we go too high. But generally, it would seem a restaurant could potentially be an enhancing use. And I think not only for the marinas, but the community. And I'm at this time, I'm just speaking for Ward 7. I think there would be some benefit to that, especially if we can get some improvement to the infrastructure. But I do have concerns, though, in light of Alderwoman Tierney's comments about any kind of unintended consequences. And Eileen, I guess that's my first question to you: is have you consulted an economist on this? I certainly feel a lot more comfortable if we get somebody a bit more analysis on to look into the Alderwoman's concerns, because she's, I think, gone through this, some change to her district. We've not in Ward 7, I think, since it was created. So that's the first question. But I think all of this, I think, we also need to look at some of the transit, as I mentioned a bit, to have all this succeed. So for the workers, the visitors, the local community to get around to these facilities is to work on those sidewalk improvements, maybe have a targeted bike share for some of these areas, expanding the water taxi, because in those cases we don't need to have quite as a high percentage of non-maritime use if we can just simply get people around more efficiently. We certainly don't want to draw too much business away from downtown restaurants. And so, but in terms of some things I think would be good to see coming out of this would be some specific legislative actions and recommendations that you think we should take, not only on how we could tweak the maritime zones, but some of the larger questions about supporting the industry. Because, this has got me thinking, across Bay Ridge there, across from the Giant, we have Quantum Sales, and it's my understanding they may get, I think they're under contract to get bought out to be subsumed by that, the Bay Village expansion for the independent living. And, now you talk about needing to have these supporting industries and supporting businesses. That kind of gives me a bit of a concern now. Maybe they're moving elsewhere in the city. That'd be wonderful. Maybe we have enough kind of sale making and repair capacity in the city. I don't know. But the one thing that kind of concerns me, and I don't know if Dr. Nash is on this call as well, but I'm not sure if that was brought up at all during that process reviewing the Bay Village plans, is, well, how is this going to impact our maritime industry? So maybe we need to create a process where that's factored into some of our development review process, and maybe that would be grouped into the comp plan analysis in terms of if it's compatible with the comp plan or if it'd be some other community character kind of thing. So that's all, I guess. So Eileen, my first question about the economists, have you had a chance to?
So that's a good question. The answer is no, we haven't spoken with an economist. We've spoken to the boatyards and marinas, both in the county and in the city. And I know Susan Zeller's Marine Trades Organization has access to a lot of that information. What I think we should do is get some of that information together, because it's a very good question. What we have seen is that it's simply a competitive disadvantage for the large yards and the large marinas. That's basically what you have, but you absolutely do not want, as Ellie pointed out, do not want the restaurants to become the focus. They can only, and it's got to be structured in a way that they are basically a support service. We use the word contributing use, but that they provide a service to the boatyard and the industry, and that's how it's got to be crafted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I need to warn you that I have an extremely unstable platform, so I may drop out at any moment. But like my colleagues, I want to thank the task force, particularly Eileen, for the driving force that she provides, but all of the serious efforts that all of the task force members have put in. I knew what I wanted to get out of the task force when I did the resolution, but I have to say it has far exceeded my wildest expectations. Bringing in Wendy O'Sullivan and the Park Service, all of those kinds of things. And Susan Zeller, of course, is a fabulous resource for the vitality of the maritime industry. And of course, my neighbor across the street, Patrick Shaughnessy, being part of that has been a wonderful resource. And Rob representing the marinas and those sorts of things. I do want to make note that the city is going to have to perform. I couldn't help but notice that one of the water access points we had circled in one of the slides was Wells Cove water access. And I'm afraid we may lose that this very month unless we really do some robust actions to make sure that we keep that. Hawkins Cove is another one that is really in play right now, and we need to do it. But I want to go to Rob's last point, which is we really won't know what this is going to look like, what the outcomes are going to be, until we see the legislation that's being proposed. And it's when that legislation is put forth, and our time window is very short for that, is when we're going to get the full reaction from the entire community. Certainly all the residents who are our constituents after all, but also all of the businesses who are going to feel the bite of what does or does not get done legislatively. And I would caution that we need to be very judicious in our thinking. I think this is something that we may want to be thinking about in terms of increments. I would also say, while my platform is still holding up, that we really do need to carve out some space with Eric and Stephen Rice and people in planning and zoning to work with the industry, those ideas that Patrick set forth on how we can really assure the robustness and make sure we don't have our maritime businesses, secondary, tertiary, and so forth recruited away, is that we have to be proactive. We have to look at the tax incentives or the business investment districts and those sorts of things. We know with our budget situation, we are not going to be able to be terribly large-esque in what we can give away, but we also know that if we don't do those kinds of shelters, it will go away, whether we wanted to or not. And so we've long talked about those things, and we've always had great plans. Now is the time when we're going to have to do it. We are really, really, really going to have to put the rubber to the road and set up those strategies, all of them, the recruitment strategies, the incentives, talking to industries about how we can provide wonderful places for their workers to live, and all of these training education opportunities and things like that. And of course, a wonderful maritime community, but we really do have to make that happen now. This is the opportunity. We have that burst of sales. That's wonderful. It will look good for a while, but if we don't do the things we need to do to keep the industry here, it isn't going to stay here. It's just not going to stay here. It'll go to Newport. Hiss, 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 hiss. We don't want more stuff going to Newport. Anyway, I lasted. But thank you again, Task Force. We look forward to getting into the meat of this and working it through. Allie, your points made about what happened to the WMC is right on target. We cannot let that happen. And Rob, you are the biggest target. So we need to work to make sure this works, but doesn't work against us. By the way, there are downsides of restaurants, most notable of which is they propagate a lot of noise across the water. In the WMI, that may not be too big an impact. In the WME, we already know that things wafting across Spa Creek over to Ward 1 generate a lot of phone calls and visits from police to venues that are happening, as happened a few years ago at Sarles when we were doing a big fundraiser there. So it's not just economics on restaurants. There are tangible physical aspects that affect community members. And so there's going to have to be a careful balance.
Chief Alderman Gay, had your hand up?
I think if we told the residents that you might have a drop in your property tax for a little noise over Spa Creek, they'd be fine.
I don't think there'll be a drop in the property tax.
It's not that bad. No, I'm just saying if all goes well, if this creates revenue, if it creates jobs and stuff. I did have a follow-up question. Dang it, now I forgot it. It was in regards to this though. What other opportunities could be brought to a space like this outside of restaurants? I did see the one image that had what looked like a tented party. It looked almost like a mini downtown, what they want to do there. So how likely is that to happen in an area like this with some of you being owners of facilities that would qualify? Maybe, I'm not sure. What goes into thought like that? Are you open to sharing your space with the general public for a space like a restaurant or a venue for parties or nightclub, or I don't know, a nightclub at the looking over some yachts would be nice. These are that's what people pay top dollar for.
So I will start because we don't have Port Annapolis on this call. And then I'm going to turn this over to Rod Jabin. They very much have an interest, Alderman Gay, in having the outdoor, mostly sort of outdoor or tented types of activities because they've got the land. There's 17 acres. They've got enough space that they can have venues that would support the marina and support the industry and not be near anyone. So I know they are very interested. I will let Rod Jabin respond as a property owner. Do we lose Rod?
No, I'm here. Thank you. I agree with what you said about Port Annapolis, and it really concerns really the WMI properties where this idea of the marina resort experience that I was referring to earlier, part of that is creating a venue site that people can enjoy the ambiance and see the water and have either a private party or a wedding function or something. Port Annapolis has a great pavilion that allows that sort of thing to go on, and it's a way to make the marina more diverse and stronger and it's not taking away from its core work of hard maritime services, but there's enough property there to allow that to coexist. And we keep using this term, contributing to the success of the marinas, but we absolutely have identified that as working in other areas. And again, you touched on it, Alderman Gay. It's not that we're trying to put a club in next to the water, but the ambiance and the experience you get by being close to the water is significant. And as a marina owner, we're always looking for ways to try and make the marina stronger and more profitable all the time. And it's not that we want to move away from any of our core business of hard maritime to support a restaurant or anything else. It's a contributor. It's just a small little section that says to the transient boater and our slip customers that, hey, there's a place that you can go and get a sandwich and a meal if you want to, and you don't have to leave. A lot of people come, they don't have cars, they don't have ways. I mean, not discounting Uber or anything else, but it's just in improving the marina experience. And because we have not seen tax relief or anything else, and we're made to work in maritime use only, it makes it challenging. The whole idea of higher and better use is why we've created these zones to fend that off and say it's not available to you. Of course, we would all like to sell our maritime property and let them build townhouses and residential parking because that's the highest and best use. But we're in it for the long term, I guess. And just I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but the last point I want to make is the boating and the maritime industry is our brand here in the city of Annapolis. And we are all very keenly aware of how fragile that is. And every postcard, every picture, every marketing brochure for the city of Annapolis has a picture of the boats and the water and the city dock. And we're all in, none of that will happen if all these ancillary service areas go away, because without the service and the support and the slips and the reason for those boats to come to Annapolis and get service and get fuel and get whatever they need, Annapolis is going to slowly spiral, away. But that's why we're looking at this in a way to improve the maritime zones and make them stronger, allow them to be successful, because you've really got both hands tied behind our back, and we're doing the best we can. But we've, as a task force, identified a couple of areas that would make it stronger, and that's what we're putting forward.
Just to follow up really quick, Mr. Mayor, to some of his points, would it then, and I think to Alderman Savage's point too, then would the task force consider bringing in an economist or an expert in the maybe in tax relief or something, so that in this part of this task force, they recommend some plans for the city council to take to create relief and assistance for these businesses? Is that something that, because to hear you say that you feel that your hands are tied behind your back, we should be able to provide some assistance, or you be able to be directed in the right way to provide you some relief. So how can we do that? Can the task force provide us those resources?
So Alderman Gay, I think what we could do is because we have to come back with recommendations. We will not have legislation in May, but we will have all our recommendations. But a piece of that could be that when I say not the next phase, as in a long phase, but that in terms of looking at the kind of support both Rod and Patrick are discussing, that could be a piece of that we could do at the next stage. I think that makes a lot of sense. And that also gets into this really tough issue that you brought up about how do we diversify ownership? I mean, that's also ultimately an economic issue.
Thank you, Alderman Tierney. We've got 4 minutes to go.
A minute here. I don't want it to be interpreted, especially to my colleagues, that I'm worried about restaurant noise or anything like that. I mean, I love outdoor dining and all. That's not the issue. Rod said himself, he needs to be profitable. So that equates to introducing a restaurant. And that the driver of that is the rent, is the land cost. So it's all, no matter which way you look at it, it comes down to we have a problem with land costs and making a profit on those parcels. So that's, and all I'm saying is that introducing a restaurant is sort of the, solution, and that's not the long-term solution. We really got to look at a way of getting the rents down. And that's why we need an economist. I've slept at the Holiday Inn, but I'm not an economist.
Alderman Pendell-Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Has anyone explored the possibility when we're talking about the equity lens, what other jurisdictions have done to make that happen?
We haven't. And, my own experience was, and I'm thinking in both Alexandria and in Santa Monica, they had, both communities had huge amounts of revenue. And so we had a lot of options to create that kind of equity. Here, we don't have that kind of revenue, but I think that this shouldn't be something that is out of our reach. I think we need to sit down, figure out what other communities do, and talk with, and get a group of people together and start to figure out what the path forward is. But we haven't to this point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. That was very excellent presentation. Thank you for all of your input from the City Council. I know you've got a long way to go still, Eileen. I'm sure you guys heard loud and clear what everyone was saying here. But I will say thank you. And move on to the last thing. Let's have a round of applause for these guys. Thank you. We truly appreciate, we know all of you are volunteering and giving a lot of your time to come up with a great result. And this hasn't been tackled. And so we commend you for finally tackling this, obviously hard issue. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
That concludes today's agenda.
All right. I know Alderman Paone is out there.
And I move that we adjourn.
Can I get a second? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you all.
See ya.
Adjourned.